sure we're all hoping some changes will take place in 2019, if not with ourselves, with our country, with the things that are going on. And so I've entitled this message from the series that I've been doing on defining moments, when you need a change. I'll tell you what changed my life. Kids changed my life. In the beginning, when they first started coming into my home, invading it, I was sleep deprived and I was handling things that normally would have caused me just to throw up. I became accustomed to spit-ups and certain smells accompanied by certain cries and more smells. I became very efficient at the 3 Ds. Yeah, you got to become efficient at the 3 Ds if you got 5 of them. And that's how you change the diaper, you see. You de-poop, you D-A-D, and you diaper. 3 swats. The poop, the A&D, and then the diaper. I was good. We had competitions, me and my friend. Who could do it the quickest? With the least amount of swipes. And I like that. The poop, the D-A&D, and the diaper. And as I'm looking at this last night, I'm thinking, D-A-G. Dad! You know, normally these things would have really grossed me out, but hey, it was my kid. And besides that, Margaret wasn't home, or she had a deadline, so someone had to do it. I stepped up to the plate. As time went on, my kids, I found that they started to multiply. I don't know if it's that we watered the first one, really, but they just suddenly more came. And as they did, I stopped playing golf as often as I had before. My nights out playing basketball lesson, nights out with the guys became a rare thing. Naps, what were they? I forget. A quiet house? No, not ours. It didn't happen until after 11 p.m. then. Now, it just stays noisy. And as time has taken its toll, my kids got older, new changes came. Breaking up fights became a regular occurrence. Basketball practices, baseball games. The days of throwing a couple steaks on the grill and making a side salad, they have vanished. Now with us, it's I throw 8 hamburgers on, 5 hot dogs, and a pound of pasta. And we hadn't even entered the teen years yet. As they grow older, I see that their problems change. They change. And what I've learned is that I have to change with them. Life does not stay the same. How can it? And anyone who wants kids and say that they don't think kids will change their lives, well, after we pick ourselves up off the floor from laughing, those of us that have kids want to sit down and do some serious counseling with that couple. Because the reality is, being alive changes a person's life. The only constant in our world is change. Ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus, he said, you can't step twice in the same river. Nothing stays the same, and we live in perpetual change. That's the truth. Now, some people thrive on change, while others, we hate it, and it causes a great deal of stress in our lives. We either, number one, we either resist it. Some of us, we have a love-hate relationship with change. We truly want things to change, to get better, to grow, to develop. Yet, we want things to stay the same. So, we resist change. Hello? That can't happen. Or we recoil from it. And recoil means that you fall back under pressure. So when change comes, our nerves tighten, our heart starts beating faster, we panic, and we run from change. We say we want good, constructive change, and then when it happens, we say, I don't like this, I'm uncomfortable with this, so we run back to what is familiar. Or we fear it. It just alarms us, it scares us, it makes us uncomfortable, it makes us unsure. Things aren't the same. So we kind of cower at the unknown future. And then some of us, truth be known, we resent it. Change brings about certain privileges and rights and lights and comfortable ruts and comfortable routines that suddenly now, as we're confronted, as we need to change, we'll have to give up those comfortable places that we've been, even if they're not good. And some of us, we resent that. The inconvenience, the frustration that change brings into our lives, it almost causes us to hate it. But here's the truth. You and I, we can't stop changing. It is a part of life. And change might be the best thing that ever happens to us. It can help us see God. It can help us experience Him in a brand new way. And change, because change is a force that we can't stop, we better learn how to deal with it and allow it to become effective in our lives. And besides this, we are beginning a brand new year, 2019. Change is here. A new year ahead of us. It's a great time to make peace with change. Jacob was born a twin. He was the youngest of two, and he came out of the womb clutching his brother's heel, Esau. And he took a lot of what was rightfully his brother's during his life. He cheated his brother out of his birthright. He would have been loved by corporate America today. He was a born competitor, and he was determined to win at whatever the cost. Deception, cheating, as long as you got to the bottom line. He could have been a star in our society, got right to the top. It's interesting that his defining moment would be a wrestling match in the middle of a dark night all alone. And it is this experience that shows us God can take a con artist and change him into a man of integrity. God broke him that night, like a cowboy breaks a horse. They break the horse, but they make sure that the spirit is left intact. And God changed Jacob that night from a cheater into a man of character. Interesting, Jacob, it means he who supplants. Supplant is a verb. It means to take the place of another as through force, scheming, strategy, or the like. And that night, God changed Jacob's name, changed it from Jacob to Israel. And Israel means he struggles with God. How many of you struggle with God? You know, he's saying, love that person. And we look at that person and we go, no, God. I'll love that one, but not that one. Or he's telling us to spend some time with him in the morning. When you get up, yeah, but God, then I got to get up early then. I already get up early. That you're talking about getting up earlier. Or he's saying, help those people around the corner. But God, I have no time. When am I going to do that? It's amazing some of the things God tells us, and sometimes we don't struggle with God because he tells us something. We've already made up our mind that we're not going to do it, so we just kind of put it aside. Like, trust me, pay your taxes fairly. Trust me, tithe. Yeah, 10%. But it's my money, God. I got bills to pay. You know, maybe after I'm done with the bills, I'll give you something. And hey, I was paid by cash. It's cash. I don't need to report that. Not all crisis situations that come into our lives are from God. We can be assured that he's behind everything. But he can take anything that comes into our life and he can use that and turn it around and use it to our benefit if we're willing to play ball with him. I came across this quote: as long as we are content with status quo, little will change. But once we are motivated to move beyond that, we will find God at work in our life. To me, this is a huge statement for believers because too many of us, including myself, said the author, became content at a status quo position. Spiritually speaking, we will always pay the price for that. Growth will diminish. Listen, growth will diminish, zeal will run dry, and we will take up the cause of other things, most of which will never satisfy. But once we become dissatisfied enough, we become ready to let God do some renovation work in our lives. But do you really want to go that far? Do you really want to let your life go that far where you become so dissatisfied that, bad things can happen in that place? So maybe it's a good thing for us to say, okay, God, where I am right now, I want to be better next year. This is the case with Jacob. Jacob hadn't seen his brother Esau in some 20 years. He ran. He ran because Esau knew he had taken this birthright, knew he had been this cheater, and Esau, he was petrified. He was afraid for his very life, and he ran. Hadn't seen Esau in these 20 years, and then he gets word as he's going back to his own country. And by this point, he had become very wealthy. He had 2 wives, he had lots of servants, he had lots of flocks. God had really, really blessed him. And by the way, part of that blessing was his own cheating in order to get it. But he gets word that Esau is coming out to meet him as he's on his way back to his homeland. And he said that he's told Esau is coming with 400 soldiers at his side. Now you got to understand, Jacob was afraid at this point. Wouldn't you have been? 400 soldiers, not 400 people, women and children. 400 soldiers. He's coming out to meet us. He's not coming out to shake my hand and welcome me back home. Now remember, he cheated his brother out of his birthright. He had been a cheat most of his life that he lived with. That's all that Esau remembered of Jacob. Plenty of time had gone by for Esau to think thoroughly. Maybe he'd become a forgiving man, but I don't know. Sometimes the more time you have to stir that pot of revenge and bitterness toward that person. Now, to his credit, Jacob doesn't turn around and run back the other way. He faces it head on. We find this in Genesis chapter 32, which some of you are going to be reading in a few weeks. It says, in great fear and distress, Jacob divided the people who were with him into 2 groups, and the flocks and herds and camels as well. And he thought, if Esau comes and attacks one group, the group that is left may escape. So, see, he knew he was in hot water, so he split up his family. He was afraid, he was threatened, he knew He was scared. In Genesis, in verse 22, it says, that night Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maidservants, and 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. It's a river. And then after he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions, so Jacob was left alone. I mean, to me, that's got to be a horrible, horrible thought in your mind. Let me divide my family up in 2. Some of my kids here, some of my kids here, wife here, wife here. And so that when Esau wipes out one, the other one will be alive to carry on. No matter how bad he was, that must have been heart-wrenching. And so here he is, and he says, I want the best chance for them to make it, so I'm going to send them, and I'm going to stay here alone. And so Jacob was all alone on that side of the river by himself. You know, burnout has many different symptoms and causes, but it's very real. And I believe I know, that's what I was told by 2 counselors about 5 years ago, that burnout had come to my doorstep. I can remember having a professor when I was at ATS, and this guy was full steam ahead. He was always busy with ministry. He was a dynamic teacher, inspiring, exciting to sit under, tremendous communicator, tremendous preacher. And I was always challenged, always determined to be better whenever I sat under him. And he taught at my seminary as well as churches across the country. It seemed to be first in his life, in his mind, and everything else took a distant second. And so it was a surprise to many of us when he found his way to a physical and emotional breakdown. Laying in a hospital bed has a way of getting your attention, I guess, huh? And pain is often the way that God gets our attention. Crisis moments, crisis points, often are his way of arousing us out of a state of complacency, out of the status quo, and getting us to refocus. So Terry went on to be used greatly of God, and he continues to be. But there are teachable moments, there are defining moments in our lives, even when they're very comfortable, and God uses those places in our lives, those moments in our lives, to rivet our attention onto him. And very often, we have to be alone. And God will often invade our lives, not to bring us comfort, but to wage war against the status quo we fall into. As strange as it is, there are times when we will find ourselves at war with God. Points of spiritual warfare where we're not fighting the devil, we're fighting our God. Temptation is tough by the enemy. I agree. But there are times when we find it easier to say no to God than yes to God. And as a result, some of us find ourselves wrestling. As Jacob was all during that night. Waiting for his brother and his 400 soldiers, a strange thing happened when he was alone on the other side of the river. Genesis chapter 32, it says, so Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. Who was it? Was it Esau? Did he sneak in? Was it one of Esau's men? Did they attack from the front? Probably not. Jacob, he was good. He would have said, hey, come on, let's fight. Let's sit down, drink, let's talk. Jacob, remember, he was good at talking. He was good at deceiving. The Bible tells us that he wrestled all night long with this man. And he defines him as God. And personally, whenever I see God in physical form in the Old Testament, I believe with all my heart that he wrestled with Jesus. Toughest fight any of us are going to have is not with the devil, it's with God. It's when a very profitable career calls to us, but he's calling us somewhere else. Or when he's calling us to holiness, and we think this other thing is going to bring us great happiness. God's desire is not for us to be miserable but fulfilled, and we just don't know how to bring that about in ourselves. So we look in all the wrong places for all the wrong things, and as a result, we find ourselves wrestling with God. You know, when I was young, I had this big case, and it was filled with baseball cards. I don't know how many of you ever collected baseball cards. I used to collect them, not so much collect them, but have them. And I had hundreds of them. And we used to, we called it pitching cards. We used to pitch cards at school. And this is where we would throw our cards, and then we'd have 4 or 5 of us, we'd throw our cards, and the colors would, whoever gets closest to the wall, we played a couple different ways, and whoever gets closest to the wall would win a whole bunch of cards. You know, it was kind of like kid gambling, but I ended up with a lot of cards. I was pretty good at pitching cards. And these cards were great. I mean, they were in excellent shape. They were from the 70s and 60s, some even older than that. And you know, I had them, and my mom was having a garage sale. I was off at college, and she sold them for 50 cents at a garage sale. And you know what? I thought that was pretty good that she got 50 cents for them at a garage sale. Until I met this guy in seminary. That's the way he financed himself through seminary. He bought and sold baseball cards. And I'm thinking, oh, I had that rookie card in my collection. It's worth how much? $3,000. I used to date a girl in college. Her uncle asked her grandmother if he could take some of the old tattered paintings that she had leaning against the boiler in the cellar. So the grandma said, sure. So the uncle took them, and he took them to a museum, and he collected over $4 million. Turns out they were originals from a famous painter. Who knew? My point is this. Often people can't tell the difference between trash and treasure. And it's the same in our lives. Too often we have a great inability to distinguish and interpret between a blessing and a curse in our lives. Look, my dad, he went into a doctor's office some years ago. And he went because he was having problems hearing, and finally he heard us as we kept telling him, you got to get a hearing aid, Pop, you got to get a hearing aid. And so he went in, and he put it off for years. And he went into the office, and they checked his heart. Ended up, he had a clogged artery and needed an angioplasty. Doctor said it probably saved his life. And as they were monitoring his heart, they discovered that he had a tumor on his prostate. Prostate cancer. It was malignant. And so they went in and they were able to remove it successfully. And the doctor said, for sure, that would have killed him. And while they were monitoring him and making sure everything was good with no cancer and being cancer-free, they found another blocked artery and they ended up doing open heart surgery. Again, the doctor said, saved your life. I don't know how many extra years he added to his life, but each time when he came home, he was miserable because of this other thing that they defined. Thank God that he's here and went, and because he was able to be with us for another 20 years at least. At the moment Jacob was accosted, he probably didn't know what it was for, whether it was for his destruction or his development. I don't know when it hit him, but at a certain point, as he wrestled with this guy all night long, he realized it was no ordinary fight. And that it was God. And I know that because of what he asked. Listen, Genesis 32. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "Listen, I will not let you go unless you bless me." Now hear me in this. A lot of us don't want the struggle with God, so we take the shortcut. We take the shortcut out of it, and when we do, we forfeit the blessing that comes with it. You've already heard the story, you've probably all heard the story of the man who found the butterfly cocoon, and he brought it home to watch it. And the day came, and this tiny butterfly was attempting to wiggle through the opening in the cocoon, and he thought he'd be nice and take a pair of scissors and snip that little last bit of cocoon, and thinking that he was going to help that butterfly. It says that the butterfly emerged very easily, but died a short time afterwards, because the effort and the struggle to crawl through that small hole in the cocoon was God's way of pushing fluid out into the wings. It's also often the case when we struggle with God. It's often the case when we struggles and testings that we don't understand come into our lives. And if we short circuit that process, we short circuit the blessing that comes with it. Does that make sense? Genesis 32:28. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with men and have overcome." Now, Israel means, I said before in the Hebrew, he who struggles with God. The name was also found in pre-Hebraic texts. And in those, it means God prevails. Now think about it. Jacob had an encounter with God. He fought him. He wrestled with him. Why did God consider him worthy to be fought with? Because God sees the good in all of us. He sees that part that is not a cheater, but was a man of integrity. He sees our Israel, not our Jacob. Some of us, our sin is ever before us. With some of us, it's easy to look at somebody and see their failures, their weaknesses. But God, when he looks at us, he sees our redemption. He sees our strengths. And he sees what we cannot see. Side note, when you do read this whole thing in Genesis, make sure you read it in its context. It's a great story. Genesis 32:29-31. Let me read it again. Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" And then he blessed him there. And then he blessed him there. So Jacob called that place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face." You see, he knew who it was. And yet my life was spared. The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. It is because I saw God face to face, my life was spared. His life was spared. That doesn't sound like he won to me. Does that sound like he won? More like the other side gave him the victory. He gave up and let Jacob win. Jacob 32:25. Then the man saw that he could not overpower him. He touched the socket of Jacob's hip so that the hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." The sun rose on him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared. My friend Jimmy loves to say a quote, and he always talks about keeping things green. Got to keep things green. And to him, that's a way of always reminding himself of where he's come from. And for him, a constant reminder of God's grace in his life. You see, God did the same thing with Jacob, and the Lord gave him a limp, a physical souvenir for his wrestling match. And the limp would hurt him every time he took a step, a constant reminder to Jacob of God's grace in his life. God could have destroyed Jacob with a word, with a thought, but instead he chose to change him into a new person, complete with a new name. And look, the Lord didn't grapple with Jacob that night and force him to relent. He never forces anybody to surrender to him. He leaves that to our free will. God was dealing with his son, and he wanted him to face up to his sin and then cross the river and face up to his brother. Isn't it interesting? Jacob had to get things right with God before he could get things right with Esau. Maybe we ought to take that to heart. When we have relational problems, they start with God. He didn't want to have to drag Jacob there, force him to change, but he wanted him to walk out of there with his own free will. The Bible tells us he did just that. He walked out to meet his brother with a limp. And that limp, that constant reminder to him of God's wrestling match and of his sin. The name Israel would be a constant reminder to him every time somebody called him that God saw the best in him. It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared. You know, some of us have had wrestling matches with God. When our sins catch up with us, we can choose one of two paths: fight or flight. If we choose to run from them, meaning retreat into that numbness that we often do, whether it be liquid or drugs or work or another relationship, we have all different ways of hiding, of escaping. The truth be known, I've taken that path many ways, and I'm sure many of you have too. Or we fight it, and that means fighting with God. And the truth will mean that we have to face Him. We have to call what it is. And in some instances, we have to wrestle with Him about our frustration with Him. It might seem like a hard way, but it's the best way. No more denial. No more pretending. No more faking it. No more rationalizing things out. You're just going to have a wrestling match with God. How do you win a wrestling match with God? You don't. That's how you win. You give up. You give up to Him. It's called surrender. We sang about it this morning. There is no other way but to trust and obey. You need a change in 2019? I know I do. You know, it makes a whole lot of sense to me to paddle with God instead of paddling against God. Wouldn't it be nice to know and have this close relationship with our God? food doesn't change. He wants to take our worst and make it our best. He wants to take our failures and turn them into successes. He wants to change our name from a Jacob to an Israel. Fight or flight. Fight or flight. Let's close the word of prayer. Father, we just thank you for your word. We thank you for the example of Jacob. God, I am constantly amazed at how you change people. Lord, we ask that you would change us this year. That we would wrestle with you on the things that we know we need to go to the mat on. Lord, I pray that you would, as you were with Jacob, be with us. And that you would remind us of your grace and your mercy and your love for us. And I pray that 2019 would be different. Thank you ahead of time. In Jesus' name. Amen.